So he dies in his brother's arms. Some of the kids were talking about how Metcalf was like their brother. And mind you, I don't really like to get into the whole race conversation, although today I'm going to. But these kids who were saying this were Black kids. Okay, so we're going to get into this whole thing of how it's right now on the verge. We have these choices, and our choices are to go this way, which we'll call Summer of Love 2.0, or it's time to do a reconciliation and realize that we don't just justify people because they have the right skin tone when we wouldn't care at all, if they had been the same color. So, how do we get there? How do we get to the point where a young man, a 17-year-old kid, thinks that that much of an offense is worth killing someone for? And I want to be clear. People have said, "Oh, he was jumped, these two big bullies." Not true. The two brothers were not together until he looks up and sees that his brother is freaking falling on the ground, and he runs to get him. And there's coaches around him, and he gets in and he holds his brother, and his last breaths are in his brother's arms. Then Carmelo, he stabs, throws the knife, and begins to run. The original story was that he began to run. He walked right up to the person and said, "Hey, it's not a mistake. I did it. It was self-defense." That is the original story, but that's not the story that came out at the court. The story that came out in court is he was trying to mix in with the crowd, and then one of the kids sees him and they start yelling, and a coach jumps over a fence, and they finally get him. They pull him together. One coach takes him for a walk around the thing so he can't escape, and he finally starts crying, which is understandable because he just killed a person. And what happened is the coach actually says, "You know, if he dies, it'll completely change your life." And he said he's not going to die. So maybe in Carmela's mind, like so many young people, he was a, what do they call them? A non-important, an NPC, non-important player or something like that. I don't know. I'm not in with what the kids' lingo is, but maybe he was just insignificant to him. Or maybe there was a deeper hatred there. So I'm going to talk to you about the hatred that you're going to start seeing a lot of, and then, well, you're already seeing it. This is liberation theology. Liberation theology, and I'm not an expert on it, so I am coming to you as a mom who knows a little bit more than maybe you do on the subject, only because it's been shoved down my throat. So, liberation theology, this man right here, his name is James Cone. James Cone started liberation theology, and he began to change what the gospel was. So when people started going to church, it was no longer a gospel with a redeeming savior and with the words, um, there is no Jew nor Gentile nor slave nor free, but we are all alike. That kind of stuff goes away. And instead, church becomes social justice. So here's some of his sayings. To sing about freedom and to pray for its coming is not enough. Freedom must be actualized in history by oppressed peoples who accept the intellectual challenge to analyze the world for the purpose of changing it. This is a man who, as I said in my last video, very much believed that oppression is that end all be all. Oppression is the biggest thing, the thing that you must think of. And that analyzing, that is to look critically. That means to see racism everywhere, not unlike Ibram X. Kendi of today, who has already been found to be a fraud. Okay, so James Cone, he writes a book. He becomes very successful in literally everything that anybody who's been through a DEI training has gone through. It comes from Black liberation theology. all of this stuff comes from like the Black Panthers in California. So when they were walking around with guns and threatening professors and bringing them out, all of that stuff, that's all packaged neatly in our institutions and in our schools. So let's talk about in our institutions, because one of the things that I was concerned about when I heard the trial and everybody was like, oh, there ain't no Black people. Well, we know how this is going to go. Well, first off, when Black people go on to be, I don't know, interrogated as jurors, and at least one of them says, well, I can't send a brother to jail, or I can't send a young Black boy to jail, or whatever it is, I can't send one of mine to jail. Then you're looking at something called criminal, I want to call it criminal justice theory. Um, but you can't see that person as a you can't see that person as a criminal because their level of oppression highlights, and you think they have a level of oppression based solely on the fact that they're your tribe and that they're a minority skin color. So that's what you've got with liberation theology. That's what you have with trying to find a Black juror. Are there, and I wouldn't be surprised if there were people who didn't want a part in this case, because if it does go all Summer of Love 2.0, who wants to be a juror in that? The thing is that these ideas are not new. Booker T. Washington has been warning about what's going on for a really long time. So here's one of the things that he said. There's a certain class of race problem solvers who do not want the patient to get well, because as long as the disease holds out, they have not only an easy means of making a living, but also an easy medium through which to make themselves prominent before the public. So let me break that down just a little bit for you. There's a certain class of race problem solvers. I would call them problem creators, and I'm sure that's what he means. He's just very eloquent in his speaking. So there is a certain class of race problem solvers who don't want the patient to get well. This is so important because, as I said before, we're on this crossroads. We can either start looking at the truth, we can start going, oh, how did we get there and how do we not repeat 2.0, or we can repeat 2.0. That's all we've got. And the thing is right now we can heal the cancer. Right now we can say this is not about race. You make it about race because it's the only thing you've ever known is everything is about race. But it's not. It is about a kid not being safe because another kid just thinks that he can stab somebody in the heart. How did we get there? So, because as long as the disease holds out, they have not only an easy means of making a living. Oh, yeah, most of the race hucksters, that is their full-time job. Or in some circumstances, somebody might make, say, a lower end wage, maybe 30,000 a year. And then they become a race huckster and they start making hundreds of thousands to even millions a year. Take, for example, Ibram X Kendi. Okay. So as long as the disease holds out, they have an easy way of making a living, but also an easy medium through which to make themselves prominent before the public. This makes them important. I show this wheel in almost every single video, it feels like, but this is the wheel of privilege and power. This is the wheel that tells you you're important, other people are not. So if you're getting this in your church, and in Black churches, most of them, Black churches, yes, Black pastors, not necessarily. I know some of the best, kindest, everybody's my brother and sister, Black pastors out there. But in Black liberation theology, This is what you're getting. This is what those kids are getting. And then somehow we decided to bring this theology, which is a religion, into our schools. And that somehow, of course, was George Floyd. So the interesting thing is that it was packed and ready to go almost immediately. Here's what that looked like. Black Lives Matter at school. A lot of people don't recognize that fist. That fist comes from Mao. That fist comes from Stalin. The fist is communism. And a lot of people would say, oh, well, communism, Red Scare, that's not really happening. My friends, it's happening. It's absolutely happening. Patrice Cullors of Black Lives Matter famously said, we are trained Marxists. And that's what they put in your schools. That's what the whole oppressed oppressor narrative is. But it came as early as the 1930s. So Carmelo's family, his family is not particularly, I think I have a picture of this. Yeah, here's Carmelo's family, okay? And this should alarm many of you because um this is not a poor family. This is not the ghetto. In the ghetto, you may expect people to simply be um bitter and angry and resentful. But this is a family that had achieved. So, I think they'd been married. I think what I read was that they'd been married for 17 years. Beautiful home, nice car, beautiful family. But even in that family, the violent ghetto culture can seep in because people hear that narrative. You should hate Whitey. I'm sorry, I said I'm going to go blunt in this. People need to understand because probably the most disgusting thing I saw while I was watching the outcome of the trial was a woman standing out. She brought her child and she said, "It's so important that we support Karmelo because no one has a right to lay their hands on anyone." And of course, this was an affluent white liberal woman. I'm guessing on affluent just because Frisco is affluent, but they're called awfuls, and you should remember that. Again, I'm just not going to be gentle in this podcast because it is so important that we take this road and not this road. The awfuls, they're going to take this road because they're so consumed with their white guilt and mea culpa, and I feel this way and I feel this way. But let me be super real. They only want to use Black people because as soon as a Black person thinks for themselves and says, yeah, I'm not a part of this, they want to silence their voices. Been there, done that. Got the t-shirt, you guys. These people only want to amplify Black voices or Black faces if they're Black voices, i.e., if they're voices for a progressive Marxist agenda. Nobody else. They want you silenced. They will be the ones in your DMs calling you nasty names. That's the reality. So don't fall for the white guilt when somebody says, of course, this innocent poor Black boy. Of course, he's going to jail. They didn't even have a juror of color. No. No, Carmelo's going to jail because he stabbed someone in the heart. Doesn't matter who he is. And he needed to go to jail because that's justice. And those kids, having been somebody who's recently watched an assassination, those kids need to see justice. It's important for these 15 to 18-year-old young people to know that when someone does something wrong, that somebody's going to stop them or that it's going to be made as right as it can be because, I mean, Austin is gone. But that's justice. and it would be justice no matter the color of the person.